Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and today we have a first-time guest here on Gardening Utah. We have got the director of Salt Lake City's Urban Forestry Division, Tony Gliot, with us today, and we are going to talk about everything to do with trees in Utah. We are going to learn about the numerous benefits of having trees in urban areas. We're going to learn from Tony about the art of watering trees and how to really create our own sort of healthy urban forest. We're going to learn about Tony's role and journey as the director of Salt Lake City's Urban Forestry Division. We'll learn about some stories of amazing trees in Utah. He tells us a little bit about his favorite tree and why it holds a special place in his heart. I know I was really inspired by this. He gives us advice on caring for trees, and you know what? We're going to learn about some of his pet peeves on how other people can care for trees, and we'll learn from other people's mistakes there. And we're going to learn a little bit about park strips and how to really take care of those and create amazing shade in our yards with them. We'll learn about ideal times for planting trees and really find ways to ensure their thriving growth. And I'm telling you, Tony gave me so many one-liners on just beautiful analogies on what trees really mean to us and how critical they are for our environment, not just our environment though, for our health. He'll also tell us about some tree varieties to avoid here in Utah, with my special mention of aspens. Well, I shouldn't say avoiding in Utah, but avoiding in urban areas for sure. We are just going to dive in, and he's going to share us his wealth of knowledge of urban forestry here in Salt Lake City. So let's dive in and learn from Tony right now. Well, Tony, thanks so much for being here on Gardening Utah. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Jenna. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, first time guest. I love it when we get new, fresh faces on the show and new friends that we can have on for future shows as well. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what got you into the position you're in today?
Sure. Well, I am currently the Urban Forestry Division Director for Salt Lake City, Utah, Utah's capital city. And I've been so for just under 10 years. Now, previous to that, I did the same work running urban forestry programs for municipalities back in Illinois, where I did it for about 15 years. So I'm closing in on 25 years of managing urban forests, and it's been just an absolute blast of a ride. Most of my life I spent in the Great Lakes area, so between northern Illinois and central Wisconsin, and even spent a couple of years in Minneapolis before making our way out here. And yeah, I mean, right now we managing Salt Lake City's urban forest is about 90,000 public property trees, most of which are in residential neighborhoods. We operate a division of 16 full-time staff that provide services ranging from tree planting to tree health care and ultimately removal of trees. And we're excited to be trying to branch out into recycling of wood and developing an urban wood reutilization program, which could provide products for a wide range of artisans and schools and other things like that. But stay tuned on that one. We're still working on it.
Okay, well, geez, when that's ready to go, you'll have to let me know and we can talk more about that on the show.
I'd love to.
Okay, so obviously you have such amazing advice and experience to give us with regard to trees. So let's just start from the very basics.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is why we do this. I mean, especially in urban forestry. Now, trees have all sorts of benefits, ranging from well, my favorite one, everyone's favorite one should be that they breathe out the air that we breathe in, and vice versa. So they are taking in our expired air and giving us oxygen in return. So without trees and other plants, we really couldn't be here. We have that kind of connection to them. But aside from that, there's amazing benefits in an urban setting that trees provide that really make our cities livable and sustainable. Those include things like reducing urban heat islands. So cities with their hardscapes and metal and things everywhere, they really do collect heat. And the shade from trees from a nice healthy tree canopy can reduce the heat by as much as 30 degrees surface temperature in the summer, and that has numerous health benefits. Now, besides those health benefits, there have been studies that show that people who have views of trees or have access to nature and outdoors while they're recovering from surgeries and things like that recover faster and stay healthier. And of course, when we have the comfortable environment that trees create, it's we're more likely to go outside and go on walks or bike rides, things that keep us healthy as well. So there's that. And then another thing that not a lot of people think about is that trees buffer noise and light pollution. I mean, these are kind of unnatural, at least at the rate that we experience them in an urban setting. And trees filtering out some of that light and noise can have a profound impact on our just peace of mind as we go about our lives. So, and that's just a little bit of the benefits that they provide.
I know. I mean, you're making me want to go hug a tree right now. You got me with the whole breathe in, breathe out thing. I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, and I can attest to this quite a bit. There's a tree on one side of my house that is blocking, it's sort of the shade covers an entire angle of on the west side of the house. And it's just unbelievable how much cooler that area is than the spot that is not covered by the shade of that tree.
Oh yeah, I mean, and you feel that when you're paying your energy bills as well. I mean, the amount of cooling that a tree offers to both the south side and the west side of our houses here is it's invaluable. I mean, I'm trying to grow trees on the west side of my house now to get some of those benefits.
Yes. Well, in this summer, I went to the Hidden Garden Tour, I think is what it's called. And there was a home and holiday that was insanely gorgeous with the yard. And it was a particularly hot day, but when you're driving there, obviously you're thinking, oh man, it's in the high 90s. Then you got to his backyard, and I am telling you, because it was absolutely covered in massive trees, right? That he planted, I believe, 12 to 15 years ago. It was its own complete microclimate. I truly couldn't believe the difference. I mean, I kept saying, I feel like it's 80 degrees in here. I mean, and it was acres. It wasn't a small area. It was a massive home, or I mean, mostly a massive yard. And I truly couldn't believe the difference.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk about, or you give that example, and it reminds me of the term forest bathing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but it seems a little bit hokey, at least for me. But but the reality is exactly that. I mean, there are people who set up excursions into the forest simply to experience what you're talking about and what that person had in their yard. And it is a thing. It is an atmosphere. It's like being in a different room of the environment when you have leaves as your ceiling. Trees are. I often when I talk to people about benefits of trees, one of the things I correlate with them, or I use as an example, is to say that trees are very similar to a swamp cooler in that they are taking up water, yes, but then they are releasing it back out through their leaves, and that's one of those contributing factors to how they cool. And whether we can perceive the little bits of water that are coming out of tree leaves when we have a room like that of shade. We do feel it on the inside, and it makes it a lot better for us out there.
Absolutely. You were talking a bit about, how much concrete and how much, area that cities can have that don't have trees. And it's truly unbelievable how hot it gets. I mean, an example this summer when some of our roadways were buckling in the heat because of the dark asphalt with a lack of shade and trees. And I find that cities that have proper planning where there's a lot of trees. I'm going to use Toronto, Canada as an example. At one particular time, I went on a business trip from New York City to Toronto, and I could not believe the difference in how beautiful the cities were. I mean, of course, New York is beautiful for what it's created, but other than Central Park, you're not going to walk around and be surrounded by nature in any way, shape, and form. Toronto is a completely different story. There's trees all over the place. And it was so much more pleasant, at least for me, who is a garden geek and, a nature fanatic. So, talk about that a little bit and the importance of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, I totally agree. If we can plan trees and tree canopy into our cities as they grow and develop, we will be the better for it. I mean, it's much harder to take environments that we haven't had trees in mind when we planned them and put them in after the fact, because trees require space, and they do create conflicts with some of the other uses that are going on in a city: below ground utilities, above ground utilities. So it takes a lot of forethought, and I'm glad to say that even over the last couple of decades, municipalities have really kind of started to realize that they do need to do that. They need to plan from the beginning to try to create these spaces, and now we're seeing municipalities start to retrofit some of these places that maybe weren't originally designed to accommodate trees. I mean, in Salt Lake City, we have some of the widest streets I've ever seen. I call them runways sometimes, and not all of them, but some of them are great opportunities to put new medians in that can grow trees, or expand the width of park strips in order to create that park-like setting everywhere we go. And there are and this is probably the case for most cities. There are parts of a city where, because of the prioritization of the people who live there, they do have park-like settings where they live. I mean, you mentioned the one in Holiday. There's parts of our city here in Salt Lake that really do seem like a park as soon as you walk out the door. And what a great kind of gift that is, to be in one of those places. But there are other places that where shade is like a hot commodity. There's not enough of it out there, and trying to find ways to grow trees where we historically have had fewer is one of the big things that we're working on.
With what's going on with the weather, the last, our unpredictable climate patterns that have been giving us a spiral in many cities. Honestly, shade is going to be such a hot commodity, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is, and in Salt Lake City, or in Utah, rather, I should say. The other thing that is a hot commodity is water, right? I mean, we
Yes.
we don't have a lot of water, or the water that we do have is spoken for, and we've had some of the hottest summers on record. Not so much this summer. This one's been pretty good, but the previous three have been record level hot. And so people are also trying to conserve water, and trees use water. So we have that choice to make of do we water trees and get the shade and benefits that they provide, or do we conserve water and let it go to the Great Salt Lake? That's a thing I'm hearing quite a bit. And there's this notion that these are opposing kind of priorities. You can't have one and also have the other. But personally, I really don't agree with that one bit. I mean, what we have in trees is we have a precious resource that just happens to utilize another precious resource in order to grow and thrive. But trees use water more efficiently than just about any other organism, and way more efficiently than we do. So, but my challenge to people really is to water your tree and do it responsibly, and then you are actually doing a good job of water conservation in the process.
Absolutely. This is one of the things that I struggle with regard to xeriscape. I totally understand that people don't want to contribute to the problem. Absolutely. But I'm a bigger fan of local scapes, where local scapes is all about creating your own sort of, the perfect combination of both, where you absolutely need trees to shade your home, conserve energy, and that also makes the environment around it require less water as well.
Without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of local scapes as well, and really, I mean, xeriscaping. if you really look into it, it provides zoned irrigation and uses plant selection to kind of be smart about water usage and not waste. But what it isn't is it's not zero scaping, right? And zero scaping is just throwing down some rocks and saying I'm done watering. And to me, that's something that is really only a short-term proposition here in Utah, because it's only going to be a matter of a few hot seasons where you realize, wow, shade matters, and it matters to our health, but also our, as I mentioned before, our mental well-being. It can be oppressive in the summer here, and allocating some of our precious water to keeping trees growing just has benefits that spread far beyond almost any other use that we have for water.
Amen to that. I mean, not excluding our feathered friends as well, right? I mean, we have to provide
Absolutely.
places for nature to live.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, and yeah, birds obviously use our trees. Now we have fox squirrels, which jury's out on whether or not that's going to be something that people like, but they're very common where I'm originally from. And but all of the invertebrates that use trees, the pollinators that use the trees as well. I mean, these are all, we're living in a system that's much beyond just ourselves and what we do each day. And trees are a big part of that. I mean, they're kind of the home base for life in cities.
Home base for life. You're giving me all the best one-liners. I love it. I love it. So let's talk about watering the trees then. I did see a YouTube video where you explained it beautifully, but let's start with a new tree.
So new trees, the good news about them is they don't need that much water. But it's how we water that matters most. So um, a lot of historically in our climate here, we've watered trees by watering lawn and just planting a tree there and saying, well, we'll water it. The sprinkler systems will hit the tree and it'll get water. And that has worked okay when we would water our lawns so much that they were vibrant green and weed free. And that happened to provide just enough water to get trees going and get them started and established. But nowadays we don't water lawn that way anymore. We water lawn kind of very conservatively, so that it's might be a little bit brown, but not a lot brown. And when you're watering that much, the trees are getting next to none of that water. So the best way to water a young tree, and the way I water my trees, is with a hose. And you do have to put in the commitment of time and habit, but I assure you that going out there and spending some time in your yard, watering your trees, maybe looking around at the life that's around you, it's worth it to you to spend that 10 or 15 minutes out there. And there's no necessarily right or wrong way to water a tree. The key is to water it, though. And if we can mimic rain, then we're in good shape. I remember we were now in Salt Lake City, we have an annual tree watering calendar that actually shows the days of the week that you can water, or that you should water, in a different color, so that you remember to go out and water your tree. And it's got lots of different information about trees and things in the calendar. But when we were doing that, we bounced around things like, well, what if everyone just put Atlanta on their phone's weather app, and every time it rained in Atlanta, you gave your tree a whole bunch of water, because in Atlanta they don't have to water their trees, right? They just you wait for the rain and away you go. But here, really, it's just a matter of being present and going out and looking at your tree and saying, hey, when was the last time I watered you? If it's been a week, water your tree. And if it's young, pay a little bit more attention to it, almost like a puppy or something that has to that takes a little bit more attention.
Yeah, I noticed on our Facebook group that's called Utah Gardeners, every time I see a dead tree and someone says, why did this die? The question becomes, well, were you, especially a newly established tree primarily, were you hand watering it? And usually the answer is no. So I think that is one thing that most people don't realize. They need to get established. It does take some hand watering, paying attention, and not relying on irrigation to cut that. the irrigation's never, hopefully, going to go as deep as the roots of that tree uh,
Yeah,
to
right.
keep that, healthy.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that, and we can design irrigation systems that efficiently use water and get it deeper to a tree's root systems, but it doesn't have to be that complex. I mean, it's great if you really want to geek out on that kind of stuff and really dial in your trees and your property. But I mean, our message really is that, I mean, our forest, this forest that we have here in this valley, was started with bucket watering. All right, people would go in and get a bucket and they would water it. And think about that. We actually one
Wow.
year we gave buckets away when we gave trees away, more to remind people just to water them. And but
Interesting.
you don't want to bucket water a tree. It's kind of a pain.
Yeah.
But a hose, and even just a little automated system that runs off of the spigot on your house, you can be very effective at doing it. And really, um, if we recognize that trees are living things, and I mentioned when we were talking earlier about how in Utah, every tree needs a person. This is a forest by people for people. And that's a forgotten truth that I think everyone should know. They should teach it in school in Utah, that every tree needs a person. If you see a tree, some person is doing enough for that tree in order to keep it alive and thriving. And I tell you what, I can't think of a better friend to make than a shade tree in an urban neighborhood. So everyone, go find your tree, find that tree, and be the person that tree needs.
Oh, you're speaking my language. I love this so much. Well, let's talk a little bit about the varieties, because there's varieties that work really well here in Utah. There's varieties that don't at all, that are very popular, that people think, oh, they're beautiful up in Park City. I want those aspens down in my lawn. Talk to me about some great varieties and some to avoid.
Sure. Well, let's start with the ones that we like to avoid. And I don't want to, foresters aren't supposed to not like trees, and we're not supposed to have favorites. But as time goes on and you see how things perform and you see some of the challenges that they present, you can't help but start to select against certain things. And interestingly enough, and this is often the case in my field of urban forestry, the things that we dislike the most are the things that were planted heavily a generation ago. And certainly that's the case now. Things like flowering pear trees. I mean,
Oh,
if you were to, we've had these surveys in our office here of arborists, and everyone's least favorite tree is a flowering pear, a Callery pear or a Bradford pear, and it kind of is what it is. Now, another tree that happens to be the most common tree in our city, in Salt Lake City, that really is not well suited for us is Norway maple. And Norway maple is a big leafed maple. And it was planted heavily, probably from the 50s through the early 80s. And now that's the tree we remove more than any other tree as it gets warmer in our city, and people water less. So while there are some maple trees that perform well, people love maples because it's a very identifiable leaf, and we like what we're familiar with. But they're not really suited. There's not. I don't know of a tree that's really suited for our temperatures. It's called a maple. Now, box elder, which is technically a maple, actually is a proven performer for us. And people get a little bit worried about box elder bugs and things like that. But the tree itself does do well and tolerates heat and lower water. So that's a tree that you can look into. There's a great variety called Sensation that actually kind of has reddish, even yellow leaves this time of year. We've gotten a lot of calls about that one, saying, "Hey, my tree might be sick." And when we tell them, no, that's just kind of what it looks like, it's actually quite healthy, they start to appreciate it a little bit more. But other proven performers in our city, London plane tree, which is a hybrid sycamore tree, does very well. It's probably the tree most associated, or that people most identify with in our city. They get to be 100 feet tall. They have big spreading canopies and beautiful bark, and they do really well for us. One thing that I would say we haven't planted a lot of yet, but now we're starting to do quite a bit, are oak trees, and probably especially bur oak. Bur oak it's a savanna tree from back where I'm from, northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin and those parts. Um, but it tolerates our soils, which aren't really that great, and it tolerates dry very well. It holds together good, and the acorns are great for wildlife as well. So,
Yeah.
um, I mean, but there's so many trees. I mean, we can grow giant sequoia here. I mean, people don't realize that, but the same tree that grows to be 320 feet tall and 3,000 some years old, in California, can grow right here in Salt Lake City, and we have some outstanding examples of it here. It's never going to get that big, but it is great to be able to walk around and say, "Wow, that is the same tree that does that." I mean, we can grow Bristol cone pine here, which is the longest lived tree. So there's plenty of good stuff to grow. And my thing is it's practically a rite of passage as a Utah resident to pick a tree and give it a try. So I would just encourage people to keep doing that, because if you nurture it, it's probably going to do pretty good.
Yeah. I'm hearing a lot lately about Zelkovas. I keep
Oh,
getting
yeah.
recommended Zelkovas. Talk to me about those.
I love Zelkovas. Zelkova is very similar to an elm tree. It has that vase-like shape that we all kind of like once they get big. I have a Zelkova on my property that I watch, but I don't water it very often at all. It's established and it does really well. So another proven performer for us. The varieties that we plant end up with a really nice fall color, and they don't need a whole lot of pruning. They kind of self prune. Interesting thing about Zelkova is it's a tree that's native to Eastern Asia, and it's yeah, I kind of traditionally been thought in Korea to be a protector of villages. So a lot of times the Zelkovas will be planted at the entrances of villages in Korea, and then in Japan they use Zelkova wood to make traditional drums. So it's kind of a neat tree.
That
Yeah.
is so cool. I love to know that. That is amazing. Okay, so talk to me about park strips. In
Park Street.
Yeah, what trees do well? Um, let's go over that really quick.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first it's important to remember how vital park strips are to growing shade. I mean, it's
Yes.
just our city of Salt Lake, but I think that this probably applies throughout the valley. Um, More than 85% of our urban forest is in residential neighborhoods. It's not in our parks. So that's that 15 to 20% of trees that we have grow in our public spaces. But most of them grow on our neighborhood streets. And park strips vary in size greatly. That area between the curb and the sidewalk, sometimes it's as little as 2 or 3 feet. Sometimes it's as big as 12 feet. And wow, you're lucky if you have a 12-foot park strip, because you can do amazing things with trees there. But creatively, in picking the right tree for the right spot, you can, we grow trees in 3-foot park strips. You got to prune them a little bit better, and you have to try to select ones that maybe aren't going to get as big, but they will grow. The main thing though is how to get the water right. I mean, are you going to use an in-ground irrigation system? If so, you should be using bubblers by the tree, or root watering systems that water deep rather than your lawn type of irrigation.
Yes,
And if you're going to water with a hose, just make it a part of your routine weekly to do so, and that tree will thrive.
absolutely. That made me think. So jumping in your head a little bit, you're driving down the street, random neighborhood anywhere in Utah. What are your pet peeves? What do you drive by and go, what on earth? Why are they doing that?
Well, as it pertains to trees, there are a few things. I think first and foremost, when people are ripping the strip, which is kind of they're a term associated with xeriscaping. If you're not thinking about your tree in that process, more oftentimes than not, you're going to do serious damage. I have lots of pictures of xeriscape installations in progress, and 90% of the tree's root system is exposed and being damaged. I mean, we talked earlier about tree roots going deep, but but more than 80% of a tree's root system is in the top 18 inches of the soil. So, and that's where it's getting all of its water. The roots that go deep, they may tap into some groundwater here or there if they're lucky, but really they're there for stability. So if we're watering to a depth of 6 to 8 inches, that's the sweet spot for really getting to tree roots. But that's also the zone that's most easily disturbed by construction activity or re-landscaping, and people don't even think of the damage that they're doing. And then the other thing is uh, 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 pruning trees by topping them, which is basically just thinking, well, my tree got too big, I'm just going to give it a haircut, like, right over the top and cut every branch. That's terrible for a tree. Some trees, like a willow, will just sprout out and kind of look okay, but structurally, you're destroying the tree.
Oh my word. Yep, you just hit the nail on the head. Topping trees. It's like, what is happening here? Who thought of that?
Yeah,
Do
I
some
see it more
research.
in Utah than I ever saw it back in the Great Lakes area. I see quite a bit
Oh,
around.
oh man. Okay, so hopefully we've convinced people that the more trees the better. It also makes a big difference in how you plant them and when you plant them. So obviously staying away from too close to the house, and envisioning when you plant a tree, you really need to think about what it's going to be in 15 years and plant accordingly, obviously. And maybe you have some tips there. But I think a lot of people assume that the best time to plant a tree is in spring, because that's when the nurseries really stock up. But talk about that for a minute.
Oh yeah, thanks. And I mean, and you hit the nail on the head with thinking a little bit ahead when we're planting trees. I mean, it's easier said than done. I mean, because I mean, landscape architects make a living making landscapes look good right when they're planted, and usually that's putting trees too close to things or too close to each other or in places where they don't really have that room to spread out and grow. Yeah, try not to make that mistake. Give your tree a little bit of space, and you'll be thankful for that in even just 5 years when it starts to come into its own. Um, but yeah, timing of year, you really can plant a tree almost any time of year. The least advisable time is in the middle of the summer where it's hot. I mean, not and there are two reasons for it. One, it's quite a stress for a tree to have to try to be finding its way in a new spot when it's 100 degrees out, even if you're giving it a good amount of water. But the second reason for that is the further you get from when the tree was dug at the nursery, the more time it is out of the ground and the more potential there is for that tree to have gone through, periods of less than ideal situations, whether a wind comes and blows them down and nobody picks them up for a little while, or the water system didn't work out and they dry out a little bit. So the sooner you can plant a tree after it's dug is usually a good thing. Spring is a good time to plant. Autumn is a great time to plant. Historically, those have been our two planting seasons.
Yeah.
But this year, we're switching to something, new to us, but probably it's been being experimented with for quite a while now, and that is complete dormant season planting. So this year in Salt Lake City, we're going to be not taking delivery of our trees until they're completely dormant. We get most of ours from Oregon, by the way. But and then we're going to start planting around Thanksgiving and plant through the winter into spring. So that tree's going to go to sleep and it's going to wake up in its new forever home here in Salt Lake City. And we're hoping that that reduces some of the stress that they experience in that transition from being dug to being planted. So stay tuned on that one.
I'm really curious. We'll have to get an update from you on how that works for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left in the show today, so let's go over one quick thing, and then I'll ask you the questions I love to ask every guest.
Sure.
So, are there any particular trees in Utah that you think that people should know about?
Wow. Well, I mean, there's so many trees that I've come to love in this in the city where I work, and I mentioned giant sequoia. There's a few giant sequoias in our city that are really awesome. There's a European beech. So if you were to go to Salt Lake City Cemetery,
Uh-huh.
which now we have an accredited arboretum on that property, that has more than 100 different species of trees identified. We have giant sequoia there. We have ginkgo trees, which are ancient dinosaur age trees. Um, uh, uh, Big, beautiful beech trees. Amazing. I mean, a great variety to learn about. But if there was one tree that's probably the most impressive in our city, it's our state champion London plane tree, and that's an easy one to find. That one is on the west side of the city's kind of showcase park, Liberty Park, and it's right north of the tennis courts there.
Okay.
And it's the biggest tree of its species in the state of Utah, and it happens to be a tree that is uh, gets very big here to begin with. So it's a monster, and it's beautiful.
Oh, I'm going to have to pay more attention when I go by there. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. My last question for you, Tony. This is a really tough one. What's your favorite tree?
My favorite tree, I've been asked this 1,000 times, so it's easy for me to answer. It's bur oak. Bur oak is a tree that I remember from my childhood. It may even be the reason that I'm a forester today. We had an
Wow.
amazing bur oak tree in our front yard when I was a little kid, and I used to play around it. And it got struck by lightning, and I remember that being a real, kind of sad time when that tree. It took 5 years for it to die, but
Oh.
eventually we had to remove it, and it just kind of stuck with me. But just an amazing tree. It gets as wide as it gets tall, and is as I mentioned earlier, it's almost like a home base for owls and all sorts of creatures. It just kind of makes the space. So I love them. But it's not really fair to have a favorite, because any tree can be a favorite tree if it's your tree, and if it's something that you're taking care of and participating with. So.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm inspired. I'm going to go hug a tree and I'm going to pick my tree because every tree needs a person, right?
Yes, do it. And I get a feeling you have some trees that are already your trees. So,
Oh, yes. I've got many on my property and they are all equally loved, although I am quite fond of my concolor fir. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Tony. It's been so fun to get all the amazing learnings from you, and I can't wait to have you back.
oh, it's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to come back.
All right. Thanks a million.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Tony Gliot, the director of Salt Lake City's Urban Forestry Division, for being here on Gardening Utah and sharing his wealth of knowledge on urban forestry here in Salt Lake City. I know I'm inspired to pick my tree or many trees, and I hope you do as well. Join us next time as we continue to uncover the green stories that make Utah flourish. You can learn more about Salt Lake City's Urban Forestry Division at slcpubliclands.com.